His loved ones hid a disturbing secret from him for 30 years of his life. Truman is a kind man living a dreamlike life on the island of Sea Haven. He's married to Mary, a beautiful woman, and has a stable job with a good salary. One day, as he gets ready to go to work, he steps outside and greets his neighbors with his usual catchphrase, "Good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon and good night." Just before getting into his car, a mysterious object falls from the sky and crashes near him. Curious, Truman approaches to see what it was, but he finds nothing clear. Later, while driving, he hears on the radio that a plane flying over the island lost some parts, and he decides to believe it and go on with his day. At the office, he tries to make a secret call to Fiji, asking for a woman named Lauren Garland, but he gets no information. He hangs up just as his boss approaches to ask him to go to Harvard Island to close a deal with a client. Truman heads to the dock to catch a boat, but can't bring himself to board. He's afraid of the open sea, so he returns home. That night, Truman hangs out with his lifelong best friend, Marlin, and tells him he dreams of leaving the island and traveling the world, especially to Fiji. After chatting for a while, Marlin leaves, and Truman stays alone on the beach. There, he recalls the accident in which he lost his father. Years ago, they were sailing when the weather started to worsen. His father wanted to turn back, but Truman, still a child, begged to stay a bit longer. The storm grew stronger, and his father fell off the boat. The sea took him. Since then, Truman has been afraid of the ocean. As he relives the memory, it starts to rain, making the scene more dramatic, though curiously, it only rains on him. Later, back at home, Truman tries to convince Mary to leave everything and explore the world, but she tells him they have debts and, instead of supporting him, suggests having a baby if he's looking for an adventure. The next day, on his way to work, Truman suddenly sees a homeless man who looks exactly like his father. Truman approaches him, but just as he's about to speak, a group of people appears out of nowhere and quickly takes the man away on a bus. Later, Truman tells his mom what happened, but she says he must have imagined it because he misses his father and that it happens to her sometimes too. Afterward, Truman goes down to the basement and opens an old trunk full of memories. There, he finds some photos and a red woman's sweater, which brings back memories of his college days. Back then, he once locked eyes and exchanged smiles with a girl he really liked named Lauren Garland. But just as he thought about approaching her, Mary bumped into him, and Lauren disappeared. Over time, Mary and Truman grew closer, but he could never forget Lauren. Until one day, he ran into her again in the library. Truman asked her if they could go out to dinner sometime. Lauren said no out loud, but at the same time, she wrote the word "now" in her notebook and whispered that if it wasn't right then, it could never happen. So, they escaped the library's cameras and went to the beach together, where they kissed. But suddenly, a car approached, and Lauren got scared. That's when she confessed to Truman that her real name was Sylvia and that everything in his world was a lie, that everyone was just pretending. Truman was confused, but at that moment, an older man got out of the car, claiming to be the girl's father. He said she had mental problems and that nothing she said was true. Before leaving with her, the man mentioned they were moving to Fiji. Since then, Truman has kept the young woman's sweater and dreams of going to Fiji to find her. Let's dive into the analysis, which is going to get really interesting. What's unsettling about Truman's world is what it reveals about ours, because even though he lives in a simulation, we too grow up in environments that shape, without us noticing, what we believe is real, desirable, or possible. From childhood, social structures teach us how to see the world and ourselves. I recently read an article that analyzed the movie through the concept of habitus by sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. I found it fascinating, and I want to explain it in a simple, accessible way, but I warn you, understanding this concept can completely change how you view your reality. The habitus is like an invisible mold that forms from childhood through everything we see, hear, and experience at home, at school, and on the street. We learn, without anyone directly telling us, what's right and wrong, what's worthwhile, what's possible, and what isn't, and so on. And once that mold sinks in, it starts to condition how we act. We make decisions we feel are free, but they're largely shaped by that mold. Since we've lived with it our whole lives, it feels natural. And when something feels natural, we stop questioning it. Truman believes that everything he does, his job, his friends, his marriage, even staying on the island, is his own choice. But in reality, all those choices are made within a world designed for him, an artificial habitus crafted to keep him from ever doubting. Even his fears have been planted little by little. The habitus isn't imposed by force. It's built so slowly that we eventually feel it's our own. It's a conditioning that doesn't feel like conditioning because it seems natural, as if it's always been that way. That's why no one needs to force Truman to stay. Everything is designed so he doesn't even think about leaving. The friendly neighbors, the school, the daily comments, the media saying the outside world is dangerous. 30 years of living like that were enough for him to question nothing. And this, to varying degrees, happens to all of us. We often believe our decisions are free and our beliefs are our own, but in reality, We're acting based on patterns that shaped us without us noticing. Think about how we learn to view others. Many of our ideas about certain social groups don't come from reflection, but from the environment we grew up in. If, as kids, we hear that poor people are lazy, rich people are selfish, immigrants take jobs, or women are emotional and men rational, we end up absorbing those messages. Over time, they become normal, and we stop seeing them as prejudices and start seeing them as common sense, acting accordingly, distrusting, avoiding, mocking, or judging, often without realizing it. That's why this analysis isn't just about Truman, but about us, about how we've been shaped by environments that, often implicitly, told us what's valuable and what isn't, what's right and wrong, who's good and who's bad. And maybe it can help us think about how those patterns repeat, and what happens when something inside us starts to suspect that the world isn't what we were told. Back in the present, as Truman drives to work, the radio starts to malfunction, and suddenly, he hears a voice narrating everything he's doing in real time. Then the radio returns to normal, and the host apologizes, saying they accidentally picked up police signals. Increasingly suspicious, Truman enters a building. When he tries to take the elevator, he's shocked to see a technical crew with headsets and microphones, as if it's part of a TV show. Security stops him and escorts him out of the building. Later, Truman visits his friend Marlon and tells him about all the strange things that have been happening. Marlon tells him it's all in his head. Still, Truman confesses he's thinking about leaving for a while. Back at home, Truman is with his mother and Mary, looking through his photo album. At the same time, a TV show comes on saying you don't need to leave home to see the world, as if someone knows the truth about Truman and everyone is trying to convince him to stay. An important aspect of the habitus is that, once formed, it tends to protect itself. People repeat it without thinking, reinforcing it, and the same environment that created it constantly validates it. It's like a closed loop. Everything supports everything else, and any attempt to break it is seen as a threat that must be stopped, softened, or swept under the rug. Every time Truman does something unexpected, the system reacts immediately. We've seen how someone close to him offers an explanation, how the media sends messages to make him believe what they want, or how something happens to distract him from his doubts. That's how our society works too. When someone starts questioning what they learned as a child, their place, class, gender, religion, or ideas about success or power, they become a threat to the whole system. And the system, just like in the show, defends itself. We're bombarded with messages and propaganda to keep us calm and distracted. They tell us who we are, what we should want, and even who our enemies are. And those who buy into that illusion, like the characters around Truman, reinforce it without realizing it. When someone dares to question it, they're often ridiculed, isolated, or, in extreme cases, attacked. The system doesn't survive just because someone imposes it from above, but because it's everywhere, so normalized that it operates through the everyday, unnoticed. Truman started doubting his world, but what makes his escape so hard, beyond the production's obstacles, is that everything around him insists he's wrong, that it's all in his head, and that he shouldn't doubt. Soon after, the women leave, and Truman stays behind, looking at his wedding photos. Suddenly, he notices something odd. In every photo, Mary is crossing her fingers, suggesting she never truly married him. The next day, Truman tries to travel to Fiji. He goes to an agency to buy tickets, but the agent says it's peak season and there are no flights available for at least a month. Desperate, he decides to take a bus to Chicago, but, curiously, the bus breaks down just as the driver tries to start it. By now, it's clear to Truman that something strange is going on, so he returns home frustrated and invites Mary to get in the car. Once inside, he asks her to pay attention to what's happening around them and shows her how he can predict which people will appear. Everyone is repeating the same actions over and over. Mary gets nervous and tries to change the subject, but Truman locks the car doors and drives her out of the island. He notices that at every intersection, their path is blocked, but he manages to dodge the cars by taking the opposite route, where, curiously, there's no traffic. As they cross the exit bridge, a group of police officers stops them, saying there was an accident at a nearby nuclear plant. Truman thanks them, but one officer makes a mistake. He calls Truman by name, even though they've never met. Growing more suspicious, Truman gets out of the car and tries to escape the island, but some men catch up to him and force him back home. The habitus holds as long as the environment reinforces it, but all it takes is a few clashes with reality for that structure to crack from within. These are moments when what you've learned stops working. The internal compass that guided you no longer suffices or starts pointing in contradictory directions. It feels like losing the ground beneath you. The rules that gave you security no longer work, and you don't yet have new ones. Often, it's not something huge but small things, a situation that doesn't fit, an uncomfortable conversation, a question that won't let you go, even something as simple as hearing this now. Sometimes, a single crack is enough for everything to start crumbling. When what you've learned no longer matches what you experience, you can't pretend nothing's wrong. Your body feels it, even if your mind resists. You don't know exactly where you're headed, but you know you can't keep going the same way. It's scary, but it's also the first step toward freedom because no one can escape a cage they don't know exists. And that moment, when the habitus stops holding up, opens the possibility of choosing differently. For Truman, at this point, there's no turning back. Back home, Mary tries to convince Truman that everything is fine, but suddenly, she interrupts the conversation to awkwardly promote a cocoa brand, as if she's in a commercial. Confused and angry, Truman demands the truth and asks if she's involved in all this. Just then, Marlon shows up at the door and takes Truman out for a beer. Marlon assures him that no one is conspiring against him because, if they were, he'd have to be involved too, and he'd never lie to his best friend. What Truman doesn't know is that a man named Christoph is telling Marlon exactly what to say through an earpiece. Marlon tells Truman he has a surprise and takes him to the bridge. There, the man Truman thought was his father appears, and he was right. Father and son embrace while Christoph directs his team to move the cameras and capture the most emotional moment from the best angles. People all over the world watch the scene, moved, from their TVs. It's then revealed that Truman is the star of the most watched live TV show in history. Truman was an unwanted baby legally adopted by a company. Since he was in his mother's womb, his life has been recorded by hidden cameras and broadcast live, nonstop, every day for 30 years. The show generates huge amounts of money through the products used within it, but Truman doesn't know it's all a sham. The island is actually a giant set covered by a dome that simulates the sky, weather, and temperature. Christoph is the show's creator and director. Everyone around Truman, including his parents and Marlon, are actors. Sylvia was an actor too, but she was the only one who truly cared about him, which is why she was fired after the beach incident. After the reunion with his father, Christoph appears on a talk show. He explains that the actor who played Truman's father sneaked onto the set because he was upset about being written off. They removed him because, as Truman grew up, they needed ways to ensure he wouldn't leave the island. As a child, Truman dreamed of being an explorer, but his teachers tried to discourage him or instill fear until Christoph came up with the idea of having his father die by drowning. Since then, Truman has been afraid of water. When the host asks why it took Truman so long to suspect it was all a lie, Christoph replies, "Because we accept the reality we're given." At that moment, Sylvia calls the show and tells Christoph that what he's doing to Truman is terrible. Sylvia has become an activist fighting for his freedom. Christoph responds that he's given Truman a better life than the real world, which he claims is completely corrupt. He says the island is how the world should be. He insists Truman can leave whenever he wants, that there's no way to stop him if he truly wants to discover the truth, though he believes deep down Truman prefers to stay in his cage. When Sylvia hangs up, the host says that, except for an angry minority, the show has been a completely positive experience for most viewers. We accept the world we're presented with. That phrase sums up much of what we've been discussing. The reality in front of us feels natural, as if that's just how things are. And by acting according to that reality, we end up reinforcing it, for better or worse. So far, we've seen how the habitus forms, especially in childhood, through family, school, and our immediate environment. But two powerful forces constantly reinforce and shape it: the media and, today, social media. Just like Christoph does with Truman, the media shows us edited stories that build narratives to plant certain ideas in people and influence their beliefs. And we almost always take those stories as truth. A recent example: in late 2024, an immigrant killed a young woman in the United States, and the news caused a stir. Depending on the outlet, the perpetrator was described as a migrant by the BBC, a man by US News, or an illegal immigrant by Fox News. Those words aren't neutral. Each creates a different narrative. Fox News, for instance, fuels the idea that immigrants are dangerous. After that coverage, someone wrote on social media that they'd be happy to see millions of illegal immigrants deported. If it prevents another case like this, it'll be worth it. But is that narrative true? A 2024 study by Abramitsky and colleagues shows something different. Over the past 150 years, immigrants as a group have had lower incarceration rates than native-born Americans. Today, an immigrant is 60% less likely to end up in prison and 30% less likely when compared only to native-born whites. In other words, the idea that immigrants are prone to crime isn't backed by data. And that's just traditional media. On social media, algorithms do something similar to Christoph. They shape what we see. Research shows platforms prioritize content that triggers strong emotions, especially anger, outrage, or surprise, because it drives engagement. That's why social media amplifies provocative posts. And since the business is engagement, many pages create content designed for that. Out-of-context quotes and videos, misleading headlines, and fake news. And so, we live in what's called the post-truth era, where reality is distorted to manipulate our beliefs and emotions, make money, or sway public opinion. In this context, fake news has an edge over facts because it's designed to exploit how our minds work. It confirms what we already think, gets repeated until it seems real, and, above all, appeals to intense emotions. When something outrages or moves us, we believe it and share it without thinking. And what's most concerning? Studies show that even when clear evidence or straightforward explanations are presented, many people prefer to keep believing the lie because it fits better with what they already think or want to believe. They're so emotionally and ideologically invested in that idea that it's more painful to change their mind than to stay wrong. The result is that we accept the lies we're presented with. We don't dig deeper or seek original sources. We don't question. And little by little, our perception of the world is shaped into a reality as artificial as Truman's. Like him, we believe our beliefs and decisions are entirely our own when, in reality, they've been shaped by algorithms or outside interests without us even noticing. Today, I think we're more easily manipulated. Technology, proven to reduce focus and critical thinking, trains us to consume everything quickly and superficially. And when we think superficially, we become more manipulable. We end up accepting what's convenient and simple instead of stopping to question. And it's not just algorithms. On social media, we create our own script, choosing photos and videos to show only what suits us, building an edited version of our lives. That performance doesn't just fool others, it fools us too. It slowly distorts our idea of what's normal and fills us with unrealistic expectations. Instead of living life as it is, we start chasing Instagrammable or dramatic moments to feed the story we want to tell. In the end, we almost always accept the reality we're presented with, unless we make the effort to think critically. In today's world, that effort is harder, but it's worth trying. It doesn't mean everything is a lie or that we should distrust everything, but a bit more skepticism is healthy because it helps us avoid falling so easily into manipulation and deceit. The next time a news story or post makes you want to believe it without question, try something simple. Question the source and its purpose. Ask who's telling the story and why. Look for other versions and compare them. Check the context, where it came from, and what's behind it. And don't take anything as absolute truth, not even what confirms what you already think. The next day, Truman goes back to his routine as if nothing happened. It seems reuniting with his father calmed his urge to uncover the truth. He goes to work and does his tasks. Mary decides to leave him because of his paranoid behavior. So that night, she packs her things while Truman goes to the basement to organize his. But halfway through, he gets tired and falls asleep on a makeshift bed. Christoph notices something odd on the cameras, so he sends Marlon to investigate, and they discover that what looks like Truman sleeping is actually an inflatable dummy. Truman has escaped. But before we continue, let's touch on something. Truman's story can also be seen as a modern allegory of Plato's cave. In that myth, men are chained inside a cave, facing a wall where they can only see projected shadows. Those shadows are all they know, so they believe that's reality until one of them escapes and reaches the outside world. At first, the sunlight blinds him, and it hurts to see things as they are, but over time, his eyes adjust, and he realizes everything he believed his whole life was just a shadow of reality. Back to the story, with Truman missing, there's nothing to show the audience. So Christoph makes a historic decision to cut the live broadcast for the first time since the show began. The whole world is in shock. Christoph orders the entire island crew to search for him, but no one finds him. Then, he decides to look in the least likely place, the sea. The cameras start scanning the ocean, and to everyone's surprise, they find Truman sailing alone on a sailboat. As I said at the start, what's most unsettling about this movie is what it shows us about our own world. Truman's world is constructed, but after everything we've discussed, we can see that ours is too. Let me briefly recap what I've explained to reinforce the lesson. Our world is built by systems that, from childhood, teach us how to think, how to live, what success is, what beauty is, what matters, and so on. Without realizing it, we form an idea of the world that feels like our own, but often it isn't. We think we choose freely, but we're usually choosing from a menu that was already set, and we don't even question it because it's so ingrained that it feels natural, as if that's just how life is. So what do we do with this? The first step is to realize it. That alone creates a crack. It doesn't change everything instantly, but through that crack, new air can come in, a different idea or a doubt. And those doubts matter because if part of who we are was learned, it can also be unlearned, or rather, relearned differently. The second step is understanding that stepping out of the habitus, or at least seeing it from the outside, doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. Sometimes, it starts with something as simple as not following a custom just because it's always been done, changing your environment, questioning something everyone takes for granted, saying no when everyone says yes, or taking a path others don't understand. The third step is accepting that this process is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for you and for those around you. Because when someone breaks the script, it forces others to look at themselves and ask if they're acting too. And not everyone is ready for that question. But that's where the chance lies, to live with a bit more awareness of what we carry, what we repeat without thinking, and what we mimic without noticing, and from there, maybe start choosing with a bit more authenticity. The broadcast resumes, and the world watches closely as Truman sails through the water. Desperate, Christof uses the set's climate control system to create a storm. He tries to scare Truman into turning back, but instead of giving up, Truman defies the storm, shouting to the sky that only death will stop him. Furious, Christof orders the wind to be turned up to the maximum. The name Christof, which sounds like Christof, can be seen as a kind of distorted divine figure, almost the opposite of the Christian idea of God. He's the creator of Truman's world, watching and controlling everything from above. But unlike a protective father, he's a father who exploits his son and is willing to sacrifice him for the sake of entertainment. Back to the story. The waves rise fiercely with the wind, and Truman is on the verge of drowning. But at that moment, moved, Christof stops the storm and clears the sky. Exhausted but resolute, Truman gets up and keeps sailing until his boat hits the edge of the set, the fake sky. He cries with emotion. He's finally made it. He's reached the end of the dome. He steps off the sailboat, walks along the wall's surface, and climbs stairs leading to a door. As he's about to leave, Christof speaks to him for the first time. He introduces himself as the person who's watched every step of his life since birth. Christof tries to convince him to stay, saying the real world isn't better, that there are lies there too, but here there's nothing to fear, which is ironic, since he's conditioned Truman to be afraid his whole life. Truman stays silent, thinking. Christof asks him to say something, and then Truman addresses the audience, all of us, with his iconic line, "In case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night." Then he smiles, bows, and leaves the show. Seeing this, Sylvia rejoices and runs out of her house. The world celebrates Truman's decision and the end of the show. Christof cuts the broadcast. The movie ends showing two viewers who, after everything, simply ask what else is on TV. That final scene hit me hard. The audience went back to their lives with total apathy, just changing the channel. For them, it was just a show that ended. They didn't realize that for years, they'd been complicit in the abuses against Truman. They knew his life was a lie, that he wasn't aware of anything. They watched him suffer, fall in love, cry, despair, nearly die on live TV, and still, they kept watching. And when it was over, they changed the channel like it was nothing. That scene is uncomfortable because it holds a mirror up to us. How easily we dehumanize someone when we see them through a screen. They stop being people and become characters for our entertainment. It's so easy to watch others' pain when it feels distant, when we don't have to take responsibility. It happens all the time in reality shows, on social media, in news reports, in any viral video. We see someone go through something terrible and consume it like content, as if their life is part of a spectacle we comment on, criticize, or share without consequences. We watch, we opine, and then we move on, without thinking that on the other side, there's someone who has to keep living with what we only saw for a few seconds. How many times have we done that? How many times have we treated someone's life like entertainment? And the worst part is, just like in the movie, we often don't even realize it. But I want to close with my favorite part of the movie, the sequence where Truman escapes. For me, when he broke through the artificial sky, it was like he broke through his entire habitus, that invisible structure that had shaped and limited him his whole life. In theory, he could always leave. He wasn't chained or threatened, but his real cage was invisible, made of beliefs. That's why, to escape, he had to slowly dismantle everything he took for granted. Bourdieu said the habitus doesn't fully determine a person, but pushes them strongly. And sometimes, when experiences, doubts, and small cracks in that system build up, something different emerges. Agency, the ability to act differently. That, to me, is what Truman's escape represents. He started questioning, and that crack allowed him to make a choice that wasn't in the script that shaped him. On his final journey, he faced an external storm that was also an internal one. Everything he'd learned told him to stop, but he kept going until he reached the door. Crossing it meant taking on the role of writing his own story, even if he didn't yet know how. On the other side of the door was only darkness, and that darkness represents uncertainty. There are no guarantees. But even without knowing what's out there, choosing to seek something more authentic, even if it hurts and no one else understands, I think is worth more than living a lie. In this way, Truman lives up to his name. Truman sounds like true man. While everyone around him was acting, he was the only one who stayed real, becoming a symbol of someone who refuses to let the imposed reality define them completely. We may not live inside a TV show, but we do live within other scripts. So Truman's escape isn't just his. It's an image of what we could do. Maybe the hardest part isn't leaving the place we've been our whole lives, but daring to imagine there's something more, something beyond what we were told we're supposed to do. In the end, living isn't about following a script. To me, truly living is learning to listen to yourself, even if the path isn't clear, even if you know that crossing the door means losing some things. Maybe that's exactly where you start finding yourself.